MELGEEK Centauri. Man, where do I even begin with this keyboard? I guess first of all I should mention this is a $350 MSRP board, and honestly there's a lot to like, but then there's also quite a few glaring issues. It's kind of infuriating. I mean, when I bought this board, I honestly expected this to be my endgame. I didn't think I was gonna be testing out any more boards, at least in the near future. Unfortunately, there's just too many issues, and I guess I'll start off by talking about some of the issues. Number one, probably the most infuriating thing about this keyboard is the USB-C cable that it comes with. Let me unplug this real quick. And I don't know if you can see, but it looks like a normal USB-C cable, right? Not really too much that separates it from other cables, at least on first glance. But the reality of the situation is that this cable here, how do I want to say it? It's longer, it's deeper than most cables. If you were to use a normal USB-C cable on this keyboard, the cable is not long enough. Like, the keyboard will go into like a half powered on state. It won't accept any inputs, but the lights will turn on, and you can very clearly feel that the cable is very loose, right? So it's not a proprietary cable, it's technically a USB-C cable. But if you compare it to like a different USB-C cable I have here, you can see that it's slightly, just very so much slightly longer. And as a result, you can only use the cable that it comes with, or I guess you could probably strip off or sand off a bit more of the grip on the other cable, and maybe it'll work. But it's infuriating that on a $350 product, this is even a potential issue. Okay, but that's not all. There's honestly a few more glaring issues that I have with this keyboard. So this keyboard has this auto calibration feature, which, it's fine, nothing wrong with auto calibration. However, the problem with this keyboard is that the auto calibration automatically turns back on in the settings, even if you disable it whenever the keyboard loses power. So that means whenever your computer loses power, if your house loses power, if you're not on a UPS, you have to go back into the settings and change it every single time. There is no setting to disable the auto enabling, I guess, of the auto calibration feature. And not a big deal, but also still just a little bit too annoying. Okay, now the final main gripe that I have with this board is, I guess, the sensors or something with the algorithm or something about this keyboard is a little bit wonky. When I first got the board, I was able to use the minimum setting of 0.01 RT, and I didn't really have any problems. However, about maybe like a few weeks into using the board, I've noticed that at the lower setting of 0.01 RT, I get a lot of disconnects. So I had to move everything to 0.02 RT. And from what I can tell, 0.02 RT works fine for now. But who knows if in the future I would have to go to 0.03 RT or so on. So I don't know if it's like a calibration issue or if maybe the PCB is getting bent a little bit. Not really sure. But also interestingly enough, this keyboard also has a little bit of a I don't want to say a ghost key issue, but if you press a key hard enough, it's going to actually actuate some of the other keys. And this is with my normal settings of having 0.2 actuation, 0.3 actuation, or 0.5 actuation, depending on which key it is. And at that level of actuation, this should not be happening. And I'm not saying like absolutely slamming the keyboard. I mean just like pressing the key with a decent amount of force, but still not slamming it, right? So I'll try to demonstrate it. I'll try to show a little video of this happening so you can kind of see how much force it is. Okay, so I'm gonna try to go ahead and press the keys and see if I can get this to happen. Oh, there we go. You see that? There we go. You see that happen again? Oh, there we go. Now it's skipping a bunch. So you can see it does take a little bit of force. It's not something that you really notice in normal gameplay. But if you get a little bit angry and you slam your keyboard or slam the keys just a little bit, you are going to get some ghost presses. Okay, with those issues aside, I guess let's take a look at the physical appearance of the keyboard. I mean, you can see it is what it is. It has some lights on the side, it has some lights on... actually, there's no light box on the front of the keyboard, and there's no lights on the bottom. But there is a screen, there's a little dial thing here as well, an extra button. Honestly, my opinion is that this is probably my least favorite 80 key style. I'm not a big fan of the screen. Obviously, if you can decorate it a little bit, you can make your you can personalize your keyboard a little bit with this screen. But personally, that's not really what I'm looking for in a keyboard. I would much rather have some actual keys here, especially if you're playing a game like MapleStory. If you're playing MapleStory, people usually have their potions or their abilities, some of their buffs on the keys right above the arrow keys, right? But there's no keys here, so you're kind of out of luck. You can technically set the screen to be some touch sensitive keys, but come on now, like, is that really, like, that's obviously just clearly an inferior solution in my opinion compared to physical keys. So I do have a little picture on here, so that's cool, I guess. But functionally, this is probably my least favorite 80 style keyboard. The reason why I got this instead of the 60 version of the Centauri is simply because I prefer to have function keys. But realistically speaking, I can chop off the right portion of the keyboard and I would be just fine. Okay, but let's be honest, you're probably not buying this board for its physical appearance, but rather you're getting it for the raw performance. Now technically, I think this board has something like 5 MCUs. It has, the standard 8K polling, and an extremely high scan rate. However, this keyboard only goes to 0.1 actuation and a 0.01 RT. Obviously, that's fine for most people. However, it is a little bit interesting that the bleeding edge in terms of latency for some reason doesn't have a much lower RT parameter or a much lower actuation parameter. However, that doesn't really matter. I mean, realistically, 0.1 actuation and 0.01 RT is more than enough for most people. In terms of latency though, that is where this keyboard truly shines. Duzi Baobao and Waishe Pingce both have this keyboard at or near the top of their latency charts, especially with regards to release latency, which I think is probably the most important stat for most people. However, it is worth mentioning that Lao Baozi in his review got substantially different numbers than the other reviewers. As I alluded to towards the beginning of the video, my own personal experience with this keyboard is kind of mixed. Latency wise, obviously, is typically exceptional, although I will say that there are a couple of instances in which I do feel like it's possible that the keyboard may have 5 or 10 milliseconds of delay, just very occasionally, maybe like once every game or so. So not anything that's like super substantial, and I could just be imagining it. Perhaps it's just a missed input on my part, but I do think it's maybe worth noting, even though, yeah, definitely take that with a grain of salt. However, on the accuracy standpoint, this keyboard definitely struggles with that. So I showed earlier that, sometimes just pressing down hard on a key will trigger the nearby keys, and it's also losing some calibration or losing some accuracy over time. Again, not really sure if that's because the PCB is getting bent over time or if it's like a software issue, but throughout I think the 3 or 4 weeks that I've had the keyboard, 0.01 RT is no longer usable. 0.02 is fine. Hopefully it stays that way. Hopefully it's not something that gets worse over time. Okay, finally, I do want to talk a little bit about how the keyboard feels. I think that is probably the biggest distinction between the Centauri and MELGEEK's previous keyboard, the Mate 68 Ultra that I have here. The Mate 68 Ultra, also pretty good on latency and everything like that, but I think the part that it falls short is that it just doesn't feel super good to play on or type on, whereas the Centauri definitely has a completely different feel. It's a lot less, I guess, rattly. The sound obviously does sound quite significantly very different, and I think honestly, the Centauri, one of the things that it does the best, I guess, is that there's almost no wobble in the keys at all. The keys are extremely stable, which I think is thanks to the collaboration that they have with TTC. That's some weird switch name that I don't exactly remember. It's not super important. I think it comes only in this keyboard and you can't get it anywhere else, so the name is whatever, but yeah, as you can tell, it definitely sounds a lot different, and it feels quite different, but it's not soft, right? A lot of these keyboards, they try to get like a premium feel, and the keyboard feels soft. Not this keyboard. This keyboard is not soft, but it feels very responsive, right? I don't know how to exactly put it into words, but I think it's the best in terms of like, it feels good to type in your hands while also not having like a mushy feel that a lot of the other top tier premium keyboards have. This is the software of the Centauri, and I actually have a lot to say, so I'm going to try to rush through this. I've already recorded this a couple times and they were really fucking long, so I got to go pretty fast. Okay, so on this screen, you can remap all the keys. It works about as expected. You can, in fact, remap the profiles to a specific key. I think that's the most important feature for remapping. You cannot, I believe, remap the little red key here or the dial. So, I mean, if you care about that, then it is what it is. Okay, the important section to cover here is DRT. DRT on this keyboard is essentially the end function of most other keyboards. However, this function actually works on the Centauri in the sense that it will actually automatically counterstrafe for you. They actually do it a little bit differently, or actually quite differently than other keyboards. Basically, the concept is the same. After you let go of one key, the keyboard is going to input another key. However, their algorithm basically, how long the second key is pressed is going to be determined by how long you press the first key. So if you press the first key for about 5 seconds and then you let go of the first key, the second key is going to be pressed longer than if you were to press the first key for, let's say, 1 second. And on this keyboard, like I said, it actually works to counterstrafe in Valorant. In CS, I couldn't really tell if it was working or if it wasn't working. In Valorant, I have validated, and I can confirm that it does make you stop faster. It's not as good as a full manual counterstrafe, but it is about, I would say maybe about half as effective. I think you save about 5 milliseconds compared to not counterstrafing at all. Whereas a full counterstrafe saves you about 10 milliseconds from full speed to a stop. So that is a feature of this keyboard. However, you keep in mind that if you do use this feature, it's going to mess up your movement, it's going to mess up your air strafes, and it can also mess up your little it can just mess up strafing in general, and it also could become a problem if you're trying to get into a corner or if you're trying to get on the edge of a wall. As you can imagine, if you press it and it's going to, the moment you release the key, it's going to press the opposite direction. So you can't really get like as tight into a corner. It doesn't really matter, but it is worth noting. Okay, let's see. Everything else works about as expected. Oh, except for the macros. Yes, the macros on this keyboard is really bad. I'm going to go ahead and show a demonstration here. I'm going to press D. And now I'm going to release it, And look, the macro thinks I only pressed it for 4 milliseconds when I held it for about 4 seconds. So clearly not working. If you barely tap a key, okay, it works fine. But if you hold a key for more than like a second or two, the macro is not going to work properly. There is also about a 10 millisecond built-in delay between actions on this keyboard. Even if it says it's less than 10 milliseconds, the lowest it's going to register is actually 10. Okay. SOCD I think works about as expected. DKS, everything else I think is pretty normal. So yeah, lighting tab. Okay, lighting. I mean, obviously, I don't really care too much about lighting. I think from what I can tell, everything works. But I'm not gonna lie, I don't really try out the lighting. I don't really care about it. Lights look fine to me, so it is what it is. All right, this is the screen. On the screen, you can have this. You can change it to like a little thing that shows you, how much you're pressing a key. It can have touch sensitive home page up and or page down keys, and a few other settings. You can put a GIF on here or a picture. This is what I usually keep it on. And I guess you can technically remap the red key, but only to a few different settings. Okay, rapid trigger tab works about as expected. I don't think there's anything to really note outside of the fact that the minimum actuation is 0.1, minimum RT is 0.01, and from what I could tell, I can only keep it at 0.02. My actuation is at 0.2 on WASD and 0.5 on every other key. And even at these settings, yeah, I'd get the little ghost inputs if I press the key very hard. So not great. These are the switches that is supposed to be compatible, but I don't really think it matters. Calibration, yeah, everything works, pretty normally. Okay, on this tab, this is the setting to turn off auto calibration. As you can see, it tells you that, yeah, if the keyboard loses power, the setting is gonna reset back to on. So that is not great. Okay, I think that's all with the firmware. Alright, so in conclusion, the Centauri is the Centauri. If you're looking for the best latency, if you're looking for auto counter strafing, or if you're looking for, I guess, a screen, then you know what you want. On the other hand, if you don't really care about those features, then this is a $350 board that has a lot of random issues. It's hard to recommend, but if you want it, you know that you want it.